The Language of Power. The Sovereign Series, Part 2. In the first part of this series, I said we had to start with clarity. This is where we begin. Before we can talk about modern problems, we have to talk about language, because power does not move first through force. It moves through words. And most of us were never told that the words we hear every day no longer mean what we think they mean. Law has its own language. That language exists for precision, not poetry. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem began when legal meaning quietly separated from everyday meaning, and no one told the people when the shift occurred. We keep speaking the same words, but in courtrooms and boardrooms, they hear different meanings. That gap is where authority moved. This is what people mean when they talk about legalese. It isn't fancy talk. It's specialized meaning that decides outcomes. And once only specialists understood it, ordinary people lost the ability to fully participate in the system that governs their lives. Let's walk through how that happened. Start with the word person. Most of us hear the word person and think of a human being, a man or a woman, someone alive. In law, a person can also be a paper entity, a corporation, an agency, a legal construct. Once those entities were treated as persons, they gained access to courts, protections, and influence that rivaled, and often outweighed living people. That change didn't stand alone. It worked hand in hand with the word property. Property once meant something you owned and controlled. Over time, it became something managed, regulated, and conditioned on compliance. Ownership slowly turned into permission. Now add the word citizen. We tend to think citizen means a member of a community with voice and stake. In law, it increasingly marked status, tied to benefit, duty, and obligation. Civic life shifted from participation to administration. Next, layer in rights and privileges. A right feels inherent. A privilege is granted. When the language blurred, rights began to function like privileges, things that could be paused, limited, or withdrawn through process. And process is where law, rules, and regulation enter. In everyday speech, these sound alike. In practice, they are not. Law comes from elected bodies. Rules often come from agencies. When rules began to replace law, decisions moved out of public debate and into back rooms where we are rarely invited. Rooms where systems are stacked in a way few people can meaningfully challenge. To make that shift work, the word jurisdiction had to change as well. Most people think jurisdiction is about a place or location, but in law, it means authority to act. Once people stopped asking who had proper authority, authority stopped needing clear permission. Then came due process, and we tend to think due process means fairness because that's what they want us to think. However, in law, it means defined steps. In my opinion, it's more appropriate to say process dues because the process is prohibitive in itself. As those steps grew more complex, more expensive, and more time-consuming, access shrank. Due process became a gate instead of a shield. And finally, consent. Most of us think consent means a clear yes. In law, consent can be implied through use, habit, silence, or presence. Once consent stopped requiring a clear, transparent yes, authority no longer needed agreement. When you put all of this together, a pattern emerges. Identity shifted. Ownership softened. Rights blurred. Rules replaced law. Process replaced voice. Nothing was taken all at once. It was rearranged. And here's the part that matters most. Once you understand how these words work together, you stop feeling crazy. You stop thinking the system is random. You begin to see that outcomes are often predictable because the language already decided them. Clarity gives you orientation, and orientation is the first step before meaningful action. It's what keeps action from becoming reaction, because without orientation, even well-intended action can miss its mark. I strongly recommend having a copy of Black's Law Dictionary for reference, not because it gives answers, but because it shows consistency. When you compare earlier editions to later ones, you can see the evolution of legal language for yourself. From here, this series moves outward, not into action yet, but into the structures people encounter when authority is questioned, into jurisdiction, process, and the systems that decide whether a grievance is even allowed to be heard. So let's move forward. And remember, we don't win by burning it down. We win by understanding how it was meant to work, and standing together within that framework, with open eyes and solid understanding.